Okay.
That's much more.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see so many here. I'm Joe Bauman. I'm the coordinator of the Utah Astronomy Club. And this is our first meeting after 2 months of being snowed out. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to see everybody. I know there's some more who are coming, but they haven't shown up yet. What I would like to do is introduce our speaker, Mark Swain. I knew him back when we were both members of SLAS, and he is quite an incredible speaker, astronomer, teacher, expert in many, many things. And I would just like to have you take over, Mark. Thank you very much.
That's a very gracious introduction. Thank you, John. I'd like to start my presentation now tonight with a quote from one of my favorite artists, Vincent van Gogh, because this quote actually encapsulates my philosophy of life. The way to know life is to love many things. It almost brings tears to my eyes because it's so profoundly true. When you have a real love for life and an appreciation of this world that we live in, and the part our world is in this vast universe that we'll talk a little bit about tonight, it's humbling, it's invigorating, it stimulates your intellect, it's a spiritual thing, it's very holistic, and that's why I really resonate with that thought. Now, most of you have never met me before, so, who is this Mark Swain guy? Well, I have kind of a funny little story to tell you. My first job out of college, I went to work for AT&T, and our department designed voice and data networks. And one day I'm sitting in my office, and this taps on the door, and this guy pokes his head in, and he says, "Hi, my name's Fred. Can I interview you?" And I started laughing, and I said, "Interview me? Why would anybody want to interview me?" And he says, "Well, I work for the paper, and I've been tasked to come out here to the business park and find the most interesting person who works for AT&T, interview them, and write a story on them. And now I'm really worried." And he says, "I walked in your building, and I started walking around randomly on all the floors, and I said, 'Who's the most interesting person who works here?' And he said, 'Every single person gave me your name.'"
Oh, that's a good insight.
That humbled me to the dust, because I did not know my colleagues felt that way about me. But the truth of the matter is, I love life, and people say, "What are you interested in?" And in total sincerity, I have to say everything. Everything fascinates me. Well, here's the article he wrote. He called me a Renaissance man, and I didn't even know what that meant. I had to go look it up in the dictionary. And then I was humbled even further to be called that. But let me just show you some of my interests. I want to show you who I am, and this does play into what we're going to talk about tonight. It gives a wider context. Since I was a young man, I have interpreted the world around me visually. And I started drawing and painting at a very young age. In fact, by the time I became a teenager, people started buying my artwork. Well, when I got to high school, my dream at that time was to become a marine biologist, and so I took no art classes. I took science and math to prepare to be a marine biologist. And when I was preparing for my senior year, I got this little wild hair, and I thought, I've never had an art class. I want to take an art class my senior year. So I signed up for an art class and started winning all these awards and got offered a college scholarship after one art class. And that blew me away. I actually turned it down. I went through 3 majors at university and went through 2 careers before I found my life's work. So those of you who don't know what you want to be when you grow up, there is hope for you. First off, don't grow up, okay? Another one of my lifelong interests has kind of an interesting genesis. I used to walk to school along this road, and this gentleman lived there who was a rock collector. And he had this gorgeous rock garden. And every day as I would walk by his house, I'd slow and admire his big chunks of petrified wood and all of his geodes. And One day I was walking by there, and this man noticed me. And he watched me for a minute, and he came walking out, and he says, "Do you like the rocks, son?" I says, "You have such a beautiful garden, sir." He says, "Why don't you wait here for a second?" He came back with this exact rock, a piece of wonderstone from the Vernon Hills, famous wonderstone from Tooele County. And he says, "Why don't you take this and start your own rock club?" I ran all the way home to show my mom. That one act of kindness started me out on my lifelong love of the rock and mineral kingdom. I've collected specimens from all over the world. You can see one of my drawers here. I collect what are called thumbnail specimens. They fit in an 1.25" cube. And I have over 4,000 of these from all over the world, every continent on Earth. And I've collected all the major mining districts here in Utah. I served as president of Mineral Collectors of Utah for a while. I got involved with microphotography. I've enjoyed it added immensely to my life. And it all came about because of one act of kindness. One human being to another. One person caring enough to encourage a young boy. Another one of my lifelong interests is music. We were at a Christmas party when I was 7 years old, and there was a man playing a Hammond organ, and he was playing this beautiful song. And I went up and leaned against the organ to listen to him. And when he was done, he didn't say, "Hey, get lost, kid," or "Don't lean on my organ." He looked me in the eyes and he smiled and he says, "Did you like that song, son?" I says, "That's beautiful, you play so pretty." And he looked me in the eyes and he said, "Well, if you get a piano and you take lessons and you're willing to practice, someday you'll be able to play like me." I walked away from piano lessons at 15. I was learning Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Opus 18, all 100 pages of it, when I walked away. And my piano teacher lamented to my mom. She said, "Your son has the ability to become a world-class concert pianist if he'll dedicate his life to the piano." Well, you all can already see I can't dedicate my life to any one thing. I've continued to play. I've played at many venues. I often play my guitar, my synthesizers in my workshops and seminars I do. I just finished composing the most beautiful song I believe I've ever written and put it on my YouTube channel. So music, again, has become an important part of my life. I already told you that my dream as a youngster was to become a marine biologist. Any of you remember the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau?
Yeah.
I dreamed of being a crew member aboard the Calypso and going around the world of the coral reefs and being in there with all the creatures of the sea. And when I was 16 years old, I was reading the newspaper and there was an ad for workers to go to Hawaii and pick pineapples for Dole Pineapple Company. And I had worked for a farmer all summers, and so I threw my hat in the ring and I was chosen. Well, every chance I got, I went down to the reef and snorkeled, collected seashells, and fell in love with the underwater world. And it became my dream to become a marine biologist, and obviously, you know, I didn't do that. But I still enjoy underwater photography and going around the world scuba diving and snorkeling. Another lifelong passion is building high-performance automobile motorcycle engines. Basically modified every vehicle I've ever had, from my first little Briggs & Stratton powered mini bike. I built high-performance engines for other people's cars, trucks, boats. I used to help this gentleman here build his small block Chevrolet engines for his street rods. And it's just another one of those lifelong passions, another one of the many interests that give my life meaning. Now here's what I do for a living. For the last 30 years, I've been a professional speaker, workshop facilitator, and life coach. I tell people that what I do is help people rediscover their true selves, own their personal greatness, and shine their greatness brightly into the world by living their unique lives fully. And that's what I've dedicated my life to doing. Joe has invited me to speak with you tonight about one of my other lifelong passions, and that's where our focus will be tonight. By the way, before I get going any further, And if any of you are really thinking this guy is all full of himself, how many of you, as you watched my slides here, thought, well, I'm interested in that too? Was there anything else I showed you up here that you guys shared the same interests as me? Well, guess what? I believe that all human beings in their hearts are Renaissance men and Renaissance women. All I am is a mirror to get you thinking about your own greatness. So no, I'm not into myself, I'm into all of us. So let's talk about astronomy. It all started for me with two events. When I was 12 years old, my parents bought me this little refracting telescope from ZCMI. And I set it up in my backyard. And the first time I racked in the focus on the moon, I was literally gobsmacked. I could not believe that I could actually see the mountains and the Maria and the craters with such clarity. And I spent hours exploring. I couldn't believe that from my backyard I could explore another world. This still means a lot to me. I keep it around. It's, you know, not much anymore now that I know more about optics and stuff, but it was the catalyst for a lifelong passion in astronomy. There was one hang-up I had, though. When I looked at all the pictures on the box here, the Cone Nebula and the Crab Nebula and everything, I had the hardest time finding those things with my little 60-millimeter refractor. I was getting kind of frustrated. I couldn't find those things. The second event that cemented my lifelong love affair with the starry sky was an overnight camping trip to Skyline Drive above Bountiful, where I live. My scoutmaster had taken us up above, we're above Centerville right here, and he basically, we parked up here and we hiked down the ridge, and we camped in this little grove of trees here. And we had all cooked our dinner and we were sitting around the fire, and the fire started ebbing, and our scoutmaster said, "Is there anybody here who would like to learn more about the night sky?" And most people begged off and wanted to head to their beds, but there were three of us. Oh yeah, we'd love to do that. So my scoutmaster took us out on this little plateau here, and he pulled one of these things out. Remember what these were called? These are planispheres. Most people have an app on their phone now. How many of you still own a planisphere? Okay? You know, these are good when your phone goes out, right? Anyway, he got this planisphere out, and he lined it up to the date, and he held it up to the sky, and he got his little red flashlight out, and he started pointing out all the constellations of the sky. I was blown away. You remember John Rampton, right?
Oh, yes.
He's one of my old neighbors there. I haven't seen you for years. It's good to see you, Kevin.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Yeah, John Rampton, he pulled that out, and he's showing us the night sky, and I was so impressed. And it's one of the blessings of my life that I crossed paths with John Rampton. He had such an incredible effect on my young life as a young man. Are you guys seeing a pattern here in my story?
Yeah.
There are no self-made people. That is a mythology that arrogant people perpetuate. There's many people who help each of us get where we are. Well, bottom line, I was hooked now. I was hooked for life. And so when I got home, my next trip was to the library. And I went to the astronomy section, and I started checking out all the books on astronomy. And in fact, I'd sit down and I'd read these things, and they were so far over my head. I mean, they had all this math and everything in there, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm sure that this math describes beautiful things, but I can't understand it. And I thought, someday I'm going to learn how to do this math so that I can understand the beauty of the universe at a deeper level. And I just would pick out every book. And you know, some of the books, they talked about if you really wanted to get into astronomy, come on in. You're welcome. Come right on in. Find a seat. Anyway, a lot of these books I was checking out were talking about that if you really want to get into astronomy, you have to find a Sirius telescope. And their definition of a Sirius telescope was an equatorial mount with a Newtonian reflector on it. Okay? So one day I was at the library, and I was going by the magazine rack. And this magazine caught my eye. It was called Sky and Telescope. Have any of you ever Seen Sky and Telescope? Well, I pulled out Sky and Telescope. There's a magazine on astronomy, and I sat down and I started thumbing through it, and I came to this page. I thought, there's a Sirius telescope, an equatorially mounted Newtonian reflector. And it was $195. I had been working for a farmer all summer, every summer, and I had $194, and I went and bought an RV6 Dynoscope. And I started setting that up in my front yard, and let me tell you what, back then, I mean, we're talking decades ago, not many people had telescopes. And so when all the neighbors saw this thing set up in the front yard, they would all start coming over, and what's that, Mark? Oh, you guys want to see this star cluster? You want to see Saturn's rings? And pretty soon I had the whole neighborhood over there every time. When are you going to set your telescope up again, Mark? And I started learning how to navigate the night sky because the RV6 had setting circles on it. So I could polar align it and start finding stuff in the starry sky. Here are my firsts. My first planet. How many of you remember the very first time you looked at Jupiter through a telescope? And you saw those, you could actually see the brown color of the two major equatorial cloud belts. And then you could see those 4 little moons, the Galilean satellites, Ganymede, Callisto, Europa, and Io. And they'd all change positions. Remember all that every night? How fun that was? You could sit there and see this great big gas giant planet. I'll never ever forget the first time I put my RV6 on Jupiter. I must have sat there for a half hour. I wanted to jump up and down. I wanted to tell the whole world that I can see Jupiter through my telescope. It was such an experience. My first double star, and this remains my favorite double star in the sky, Alberio. I couldn't believe, in fact, before I got my RV6, I didn't know that stars came in colors other than white. White. I thought stars were white. And all of a sudden, here's Alberio. Bright orange and blue, and I'm thinking, oh my heavens, is there anything more beautiful than that in the heavens? And I'm going to come back to this. Come on in, folks. Come on in. Let's see. I'm sure we can consolidate and get you in here. Come on in. Don't be shy. Looks like you got 3 young astronomers there with you.
No.
That's wonderful. Let's get you all in here. Anyway, Alberio's about 400 light years away, and there's still a debate going on as to whether this is actually an orbital double or not. And the debate's been going on for a long, long time. And the current thinking is if it is an actual orbiting double, the rotational period's around 100,000 years. But they discovered something very interesting. The orange component here is also a double star, and its orbital period is 412 years. And so the farther we dig, the more and more we learn. My first star cluster was M13. How many of you remember racking in the focus on M13 the very first time? And seeing this smattering, it looked like diamonds thrown on a black velvet background. And in fact, M13 is where I learned to use averted vision. What's averted vision? Anybody?
We don't look directly at it, you see it better from the sort of the side of your eye.
And the reason for that is that on our retina, in the middle, we have what are called cones. Those are our color vision. And as we go toward the periphery, we have more black and white receptors. Those are called our rods, and they're more light sensitive. And so if you can kind of look off center, all of a sudden it's almost like the magnification just increased and you see more detail. And this is what I learned how to look and use averted vision on. By the way, this is 25,000 light years away, about 145 light years in diameter. 200,000 stars. And I started thinking about that in 25,000 light years. Well, what does that mean? That means I'm looking at that object as it existed 25,000 years ago. My telescope had become a time machine. That was an incredible realization for me. My first emission nebula was M8. What's that? What's the popular name for M8?
Lagoon.
It's the Lagoon Nebula, right? 5,000 light years away, about 110 by 51 light years in diameter. And this is literally a stellar nursery. You are looking at creation. You are looking at new stars actually being born. It's full of proto-star material. You can see these Bach globules here. This is condensing material that's coming down into stars. You are literally looking at creation taking place. So here I am with my RV6, and I'm seeing gas clouds in the cosmos through my telescope. I couldn't believe that I could visually see gas clouds, nebula, through my RV6. It was an incredible journey for me with my telescope. My first planetary nebula was M57, or the Ring Nebula. How many of you remember looking at the little smoke ring for the first time? And the cool thing about the Ring Nebula is it takes magnification pretty good. You can blow that up. And I was looking at this thing here, and I thought, wow, how cool is that? That's 2,570 light years away. I believe it's about 2.6 light years in diameter at this point. The nebula actually started being created about 1,610 years ago. In fact, this is very humbling when you look at the Ring Nebula, because this is going to be the evolutionary track of our sun, Sol. Way in the future, it'll slough off the outer layers of its atmosphere into a planetary nebula, and then all that will remain is a little white dwarf star. My first galaxy, M81, or better known as Boda's galaxy. Gorgeous. 12 million light years distance. 90,000 light years in diameter, 250 billion stars. Now, I had an incredible experience with Boda's galaxy. I'll never forget looking at that the first time and thinking, I'm looking at another island universe like my Milky Way. And I wondered, the little boy in me that's never died, wondered this. I wonder if there's somebody living on a planet orbiting one of those 250 billion stars that's in his or her backyard with a telescope right now, looking at the beautiful Milky Way galaxy in which I live. It was a very spiritual or metaphysical experience for me when I looked at Boda's galaxy. Okay, this next part of the story took place right up here on the roof. Years and years ago, back in the 70s, I came up here one night. There was an open house at the observatory on the roof. And there was a really nice gentleman by the name of Lowell Lyon, and he was operating the telescope. And I started asking him all these questions. And he was the most jolly, happy guy, and he says, well, Mark, he says, it sounds like you're interested in astronomy. Why don't you come join the Salt Lake Astronomical Society? You can hang out with people who love the stars like you do. Well, I did, and I met a lot of wonderful people. We met at the Hanson Planetarium on State Street, and that took my interest in the stars to a whole nother level. Now, one of the things that happened when I joined the Astronomical Society is at the time we were able to get a discount on Astronomy magazine and Sky and Telescope magazine. And so I was literally able to get both those magazines for roughly a little bit more than if I had bought one of them on my own. So I subscribed to both Sky and Telescope and Astronomy. And one day I was going through the pages and I came across this ad. And I had known Meade at that time as the company that made high quality equatorially mounted reflecting telescopes. And now they were getting into building Schmidt-Cassegrains. And at the time, who was the undisputed leader in amateur Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes? At the time, a company by the name of Celestron. Okay? And I had been talking to a guy that worked at the planetarium, and he was trying to talk me into buying a C8, a Celestron 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain. But when I saw this, I noticed that the field tripod seemed to be built a lot more sturdy, and it looked like it had a little bit more modern design, so I went with the Meade 2080. In fact, I was one of the first people to buy Meade 2080. I had to get on a waiting list and waited almost a year to get it when they first came out. One of the best telescopes that I have ever owned in my life. Okay, I told you that I started reading every book. And so what happened, I started putting presentations together and made slides and went out and started talking to groups. Whoever wanted to listen to me, I talked. That's what you do when you talk for a living. You talk to whoever will listen to you, right? Well, I was invited to come up here to the University of Utah and speak to the students about my love for the night sky. Just kind of like I'm doing what about full circle here tonight. Isn't this weird? Well, here's the actual flyer from that star party I did at the University of Utah. Clear back in, what was it, 1983? 1983. And I'm up there in front, and I'm giving this presentation, and this young college student starts asking me all these really cool questions about astronomy and physics. And I was impressed. I thought, man, this young lady is bright. And I set up my telescope after, and all the people were looking at the stuff that I had shown them in my slideshow. And all of a sudden I noticed everybody was gone but this young lady. And she was still asking me questions, and I thought, man, she must really like astronomy. And then I thought, I think she actually likes me. So I got her telephone number, and there she is. That's how I met my wife. It's a true story, you know. It's very interesting seeing how people meet in this world, the synchronicities that take place. So that's a beautiful thing. Anyway, my wife and I got really involved in the Astronomical Society. And one of the neat things we did back in the day, and we need to think about this maybe, Joe?
Yeah.
We used to do conjoint star parties with other star clubs. And this is one we held at Dinosaur National Monument with the Denver Astronomical Society in 1985. That was so fun, walking around and looking through different telescopes and meeting people from all walks of life. I was in seventh heaven. I thought that was just about the best thing in the world, right? Well, I'd like to share some of my favorite books early on with you. Young people, learn to love to read, and you will always have a friend. You will never, ever run out of friends as long as you love to read. Reading is my #1 passion in life. Of all my interests, none of them come close to reading. I love to learn, and I love to share what I learn with other people. So here are some of my favorite books early on. How many of you remember Patrick Moore, the famous British astronomer? Anybody remember Patrick Moore? Yes. He wrote in a very conversational style and was prolific. I mean, he was like Isaac Asimov almost. He was putting out all these books. But they were easy to understand. I actually likened him to Bob Ross of astronomy. I mean, I think he introduced more people to astronomy than anybody else who was living at the time, right? Well, this was chock full of facts about the universe, and I read it over and over, and I highlighted it and wrote stuff in here, and this became one of my favorite books. All about telescopes. If all math books were written like this book here, visually, we would have way more mathematicians on planet Earth right now. That's what's missing. I could understand everything Sam Brown was saying because it was explained so well. And this is probably my favorite astronomy book I have ever bought. I cherish it. All About Telescopes by Sam Brown. My Encyclopedia of Astronomy. Burnham's Celestial Handbooks, 3 volumes. Anybody remember these? This is my traveling copy. I have hardbacks in my library, but these accompany me at the telescope. Robert Burnham was actually an astronomer at Lowell Observatory in northern Arizona, and he took the whole night sky, constellation by constellation. He wrote about the history, the mythology, all the lists of interesting stars in each constellation, and then the deep sky objects, and then the cosmology, the current cosmology, and what our current knowledge was on these objects in the universe. A lot of people curl up with novels at night. I'd sit in my bed and read Burnham's Celestial Handbook and learn about the starry sky. Is there anybody in here who enjoys astrophotography? Well, we know he does. He's a master, Paul here, and Joe does too. I came across this book. An amateur astronomer by the name of Everett Kramer lived in Prescott, Arizona, and he had a 12.5-inch cave reflector, an equatorially mounted Newtonian reflector in a very dark sky site. And he built his own cold camera. and used dry ice in it, and he would cut single frames of tri-X-pan black and white film and take pictures. Now, the pictures in here are not impressive by 2023 standards, but for when this book was written, they were world class. And I thought, how would that be to take pictures of the Messier objects from your own backyard? Can you even imagine that, Mark, how cool that would be? Well, this is the book that got me started with astrophotography. I ordered a T-ring for my Pentax camera and a T-adapter and started taking pictures of the night sky because of that book there. Here's my first star atlas. Norton's Star Atlas. This was at my telescope for years when I very first started. It's really cool. It's taken the globe of the sky and broken it into by season. And I took my little red pen, as you can see here, and drew all the lines of the constellations. And then I made myself a little template here with a Telrad finder, a 50 millimeter, a 30 millimeter, and a 12 millimeter eyepiece, so that I could see about how things were and I could learn how to star hop. And this became especially useful when I got my first Dobsonian that didn't have setting circles, where I had to learn how to navigate. Kevin knows how that is, where you have to navigate the sky by your knowledge of the night sky. Well, here is the creme de la creme of the day of star atlases. This, back in the day, was the thing that everybody wanted to have. In fact, this is a collector's item now. Atlas of the Heavens by Antonin Bekvar from the Czechoslovakia National Observatory. And boy, this is a serious star atlas here.
It almost looks like the original thing.
Yeah, I took my pen and drew in all the constellations here and made myself templates again for my finders and my eyepieces. This is a beautiful thing to have. It reminds me back in the day when things weren't so automated as they are today. One night I was at the Astronomical Society meeting, and a gentleman came up to me, and I found out, we got talking, and he lived in Bountiful, where I live. And he said, "Mark, my dad and I just built an observatory in my backyard. Would you like to come see it?" And I said, "An observatory in your backyard? Really?" And so we went over, and he took us up in his observatory, and I was fascinated. I couldn't believe that somebody could have an observatory in their own backyard. Well, Christy remembers, because the night I left there, that planted this little thing in my mind. And I thought, someday Mark Swain is going to have an observatory in his backyard. I don't know when it will be, but it will happen. Someday I will have an observatory.
Do you have one now?
I do. Okay, now here are my humble beginnings with astrophotography. This was through my Meade Schmidt Cassegrain and my new little adapter I bought for my camera. Those are not very impressive by 2023 standards, but this was a long, long time ago, okay? 40 years ago, and this is film, using film, not digital. Remember that star party I showed you at Dinosaur National Monument? That was the first night I ever tried piggyback photography, where I attached my 35 millimeter camera on my telescope. The telescope would guide the night sky, and I took wide-angle pictures through my 35 millimeter camera. This was a single 3-minute exposure, and I used what was called hypersensitized Fujichrome 400 film. It was soaked in hydrogen gas to increase its sensitivity tenfold. And I won first place in Salt Lake Astronomical Society's photo contest that year for piggyback. And I was kind of proud of myself being a rookie, you know, and for a first try.
How much was that roll of film?
Back in the day, it was like $10, and that was a lot of money back then. But you know what? It was a process where they cooked it in that, they literally cooked it in heated forming gas, and what it did is allowed this film to be very, very sensitive and not to fail from reciprocity failure so fast. Well, Konica came out. They wanted to keep the competition going with Fuji, so they came out with a 3200 ASA film, and I gas hypered that too.
Wow.
This is one of the most wonderful nights I have ever spent in my life. My wife and I got in our 4-wheel drive truck and we drove up a dirt road in Uintas. I didn't even know where we were. We got clear to the top of the mountain. I came around this bend. There was a perfect place to pull off, and the whole south dropped off to the expanse of the whole night sky, horizon to horizon. I set up my Schmidt-Cassegrain, put my 35mm camera on top, attached my cable release, and spent the entire night filling that roll of film. Now, you're looking at these and thinking, well, those aren't that great, and I agree with you. But let me tell you something about those. Those are single shots, exposures, no stacking whatsoever, no post-processing whatsoever. That's how they came from the photo lab when they came back to me. And so that's the faithful representation of what that film looked like back then. So in that light, they are a little more impressive, you know, given the age that they were. Okay, astrophotography went on a hiatus for me in the 90s because I was traveling with my business. But one night I saw that, you know, Hale-Bopp was so bright in the sky, I mean, you can see it with your naked eye. So I just put my little camera out there and took an exposure of it. That actually, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but Hale-Bopp was one awesome comet. I mean, anybody, you wouldn't have to say, well, now where do I look to find Hale-Bopp? No. Well, just step outside, start looking around the sky, I guarantee you'll see Hale-Bopp. You know, it's right there. Okay, combining business with pleasure. I told you that for a living I teach seminars and I'm a life coach. Well, I would go to these summer retreats for companies, and they would have me speak on business topics like technical writing, interpersonal communication. One day I was teaching, and the speaker after me was teaching a class on a fun subject. And I thought, companies pay for fun subjects? I thought they only paid for serious business subjects. So I thought, well, I have a fun subject I can sell them, because a lot of times they would stay overnight at these places where they would go for their retreats. And so I started selling star parties to go with my business seminars. Here's the actual flyer I used in the early 90s. And what I would do as a marketing thing, I would say, you know what, if you'll buy my business presentation, if you'll choose me to be your speaker, I'll throw this in for free. I'll stay overnight, I'll give you a great big slideshow, your employees, and I will set up my telescopes and show you the night sky for free. Done. And I felt bad for the people who were trying to compete against me. Not a whole lot, but I felt kind of bad for them. Okay. How many of you have ever been to a major observatory? I think when we get into astronomy, I think that that's kind of a common desire for a lot of us. I kind of liken them to, you know, temples of astronomy, the places where all the wonderful things of the cosmos have been discovered. And so early on, I wanted to go to these, and the first one that I went to was Lick Observatory. I was a technical person for AT&T, and I was down in Santa Clara doing some technical training, and I had to stay over the weekend. And everybody was saying, well, what should we do? And I said, well, you know, I'm into astronomy, and Mount Hamilton in the South Bay has Lick Observatory. Would anybody like to go see that with me? So we all piled my cars, as many as we could get. We went down there, and I got to see the 120-inch reflector and the 36-inch refractor. That was a really cool experience. In 2005, my wife and I went scuba diving in the Yucatan, and that's another one of our interests. And I thought, why don't we go over to Chichen Itza? You know, it's like a half-day drive over there. So we cruised over to Chichen Itza to see El Caracal, which means snail in Spanish. This is the Mayan observatory built in 906 AD. And I'm thinking to myself, I saw that in books, and I thought, I never thought I'd stand there and see that, and here I am, you know? You can have any of these after if you want. I can give you my slide deck. This is Mount Palomar. Mount Palomar is always going to have a very special place for me. When I started studying astronomy, I realized that the 200-inch Hale telescope in tandem with the 48-inch Schmidt telescope had been responsible for really opening up the cosmos. All the major discoveries of the cosmos have been made during my lifetime had their genesis at Mount Palomar. I was speaking down at Utah Valley University not long ago, and Professor Joe Jensen, who runs the astronomy department down there, we were talking, and he says, Mark, I did my undergraduate, just a second, I'll get it. He says, I did my undergraduate at Caltech, and they run Mount Palomar. And he says, one night my professor invited me to go down to Mount Palomar with him and help him do his research project. We got there, and the sky was not cooperating, so he says, I've got a treat for you. And he called down to the technician, he said, slow the 200-inch telescope to Saturn.
Oh.
And and they put an eyepiece in the 200-inch Hale telescope, and he got to see Saturn through the 200-inch Hale telescope on Mount Palomar. Now, that gives me the chills just thinking about how cool that would be to see that. My wife and I combined a trip to the Tucson Mineral Show in 2011 with a trip to Kitt Peak National Observatory. How many been to Kitt Peak? Anybody been to Kitt Peak? It's really fun, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
What they do with kids? I'm sorry, I forgot you. What was your question, sir?
Was that Mayan telescope the first one ever recorded that was built?
His question was the Mayan telescope the first one ever built or recorded? Actually, it didn't have a telescope in it, but what it did is they had different slits in the brickwork that at different times of the year, certain constellations and stars would shine through those, and that's how they tracked the seasons. Okay, so it was an observatory. You don't have to have a telescope to observe the stars, do you? No. This is what we use here, and that's what they use. That's a very good question.
Was it the first observatory?
What's that?
Was it the first observatory?
No, it wasn't the first observatory. There are many observatories on Earth. How many of you ever heard of Stonehenge in England? That was also an observatory. And those monoliths there, the constellations would line up with different those Saracen stones at different times of the year, and that's how they tracked the seasons and events. Anyway, at Kitt Peak National Observatory, if you've never been here, please put it on your list if you love astronomy. They have a program, an outreach program at night. They give you a box dinner. They show you a big slideshow in the visitor center, and when that's done, they take you out on this great big deck they've built. They pass out 10 by 50 binoculars and planispheres to everybody, and they lead you looking at all the stuff in the sky with a laser pointer and show you where to look and everything. And I thought, well, how cool is that? And then our docent said, we have a real special treat for you tonight. I'd like to divide you into 6 groups. Each group was sent to one of the observatories on top of Kitt Peak, and we got to use the big telescopes to look at the universe. Now, how freaking cool is that? So, I mean, that wasn't that fun, huh?
Very fun.
That was just awesome. Okay, in 1986, my wife and I went to Hawaii to see Halley's Comet, and it was a very big disappointment. But one of the things we wanted to do while we were there is go to the top of Mauna Kea and see the observatory complex, and we got rained out and we didn't do it. So when we went back in 2016 to the Big Island, I thought, I want to go to the top of Mauna Kea, and so we did. And when you get to the visitor center at 9,200 feet, they say, please stay here for at least a half hour. You have just come from sea level to 9,200 feet, and your body has got to be nice to your body, okay? So we're sitting there, and while we're doing it, you can tell I'm a type A person. I don't sit too good. So I'm cruising around, and I notice how they store their telescopes for the nightly star parties. And I almost had cardiac arrest. I don't know how fastidious you guys are with your telescopes, but I looked at that and went, ah! I had to look the other way. Well, at the end of our acclimation period, my wife and I hop in our Jeep and we head up, and this road is steep. Up we go, and I cannot tell you how gorgeous the vistas are. This is at about 10,500 feet, and we're looking down at the visitor center down here. See the Mauna Loa, the great shield volcano that's erupting right now, I believe, on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's sticking up above the cloud deck there. Well, we start getting close to the top, and all of a sudden the road's paved. Why is that? Anybody have a guess?
They have to plow it.
The volcano had erupted.
Well, that's a pretty good guess. That's a pretty good guess. Yes.
It was really hot, so it was starting to crumble up and come up.
That's a really good guess too, because we know that when things get hot, sometimes roads buckle, right? These are smart kids, aren't they? Sir?
They have to plow the snow in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Okay, they have to plow the snow in the wintertime. I asked Dr. Jensen, by the way, who at UVU, he did his graduate work at the University of Hawaii. So he worked in all the observatories on Mauna Kea. He said it's to keep the dust down. On the great big huge expensive instruments on top of Mauna Kea is the #1 reason that they paved the road. Okay, so look how steep that road is. And all of a sudden we come along around the bend, and I was euphoric. There are some of the grandest instruments ever built on planet Earth. you know, the Caltech telescope, no, James Clerk Maxwell Caltech, the big, huge Subaru telescope, and the twin domes of the Keck telescope on Mauna Kea. Well, we get to the top, and I pile out. I'm like a little kid at Christmas time, and all of a sudden I can't find my wife. And I go around to the other side of the car, and she's doubled over.
Oh, no.
And I go, what's the matter? She says, I feel horrible. She had altitude sickness.
Oh.
And I thought, oh no. So I snap a couple of pictures. I want to have some pictures. And I pile my wife back in the car, and we're hightailing down the road. It's like I didn't even know how low I had to get her to make her not sick, but I was freaking out. I didn't know, you know, because she was in bad shape. So folks, if you ever go there, please be nice to your body. You have no idea how your personal physiology reacts to altitude. What's the highest point in Utah? I heard it?
Kings Peak.
It's Kings Peak. And it's about 13,500 or 600 feet high. Mauna Kea is over 13,800 feet high. And that's from sea level to there. I climbed Kings Peak when I was a Boy Scout, and that was a grueling hike. I can't imagine going from sea level to that in one day, right? In 35 miles. Okay. Well, young people, I want you to listen very carefully right now. I'm sure at your young age you already have dreams of things that you'd like to do in your life. Don't you? How many of you have some dreams? Keep them right here. And don't let anybody ever tell you you can't live your dream. Because you can. I designed and built Pleasant Valley Observatory in 2005 and 2006. I patterned it after the 200-inch dome on Mount Palomar. I was 50 years old when first flight took place. So it took 50 years for that dream to be realized. Dreams come true if you never let them go.
So where is this at?
Bountiful, Utah.
Well,
Okay, I had been teaching various classes at universities over the years, and I had taught a class up here in the College of Health, and word got out to the Osher Institute of Lifelong Learning, and they found out about all my interests, and they asked me if I would come teach a class on kaleidoscopes. So I came and taught a class on Sir David Brewster, the inventor of the kaleidoscope. I called it Kaleidoscopes, the Science and the Art, and I helped people love mathematics. I showed them the mathematics of how a kaleidoscope works, and then we all built kaleidoscopes. So the science and the art, well, they loved it so much. They sat me down and they go, we have a proposal for you. And I says, what's that? You like astronomy, don't you? Yeah. Would you be willing to create a semester-long course on astronomy for a lay person and take them from planet Earth to the very frontiers of the universe? I taught that in 2013. It was packed. And it was very, very well received at the Osher Institute of Lifelong Learning. I called my course The Marvels and Mysteries of Our Universe. For the last class, I hosted a star party at Red Butte Garden and Arboretum. I took my Dobsonian up there and I showed them the things that we had been looking at on the slides during the course of the class. They asked me to come back. I couldn't because of my work schedule and my travel. But there's probably some Osher classes in the future for me again at some point. In 2015, I replaced my 1,000-pound dome that was getting harder and harder for me to turn. I got to tell you, as you get older, you don't get old inside, but your body on the outside gets old. And it was getting hard to turn that 1,000-pound dome, so I replaced it with an Explorer dome. I can turn that dome with one finger.
whoa.
It is incredible. And you can see what nice neighbors I have. They all helped me with that. Here's the inside of my observatory. People ask me why I have this great big high pillar in there, and it's so I can see over my house. Okay? This is in the north of my backyard, and my house is in the south end of my yard, so I had to build it high enough that I could see over the top of my roof, so that's why I observed the observatory observing platform up there. Continuing adventures. How many of you saw the full solar eclipse in 2017? Fantastic. We went to a little place in the middle of freaking nowhere, southeast of Shoshone, Wyoming. And this is so funny because I found this perfect little dirt road, and I'm cruising down there. I get out and I pitch my tent, and all of a sudden cars started pulling off the road.
Oh, no.
And I thought, well, that guy must know where he's going. And so pretty soon I had the Australians on this side, the Germans on this side. It was literally an international festival by the time it came, and it was a blast. We're all sitting there together. This is one of the most awe-inspiring things I've ever seen in my life. I will never forget the moment of totality. All of a sudden the sky went dark and there was nothing there, and all of a sudden, boom, the corona comes out, and I was just, you could see the dancing tendrils of light. It's one of the most awe-inspiring. Now, there's a full solar eclipse coming up. I believe it's April 24. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
I think you can see it from like Texas. If you've not been there before, seen one, please put that on your bucket list of things to do in life. There's nothing I've ever seen like that. That's a picture I took. I'm sitting there with my 35mm camera trying to take pictures, and I'm thinking maybe one of them will turn out. You know, I wanted to look at it too. My wife's laughing and my friends are all laughing, but double tasking Mark, not real good. But people ask me where my favorite observing sites are. They're all in southern Utah. The top picture is on the way to Dead Horse Point. There, a state park. There's a great big level area of rock there, and it's just a beautiful flat horizon. And then the lower picture is down by Hanksville. Very, very dark sky sites. Whether you're doing astrophotography or visual work, if you've never been to a really dark, I ought to talk to our dark sky ambassador over there in the corner. You were, tell them a little bit. You were our dark sky. Tell them.
Yeah, I worked for 3 years in Utah State Parks doing dark sky and astronomy outreach. So
Tell
I
them your
got
name.
to help. My name's Shelby, for those of you that don't know me. But yeah, I got to go around, travel to most of the dark sky parks in Utah and do astronomy outreach.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
So, there you go. Utah has some of the most dark skies in the United States. Now, in 2019, remember the guy at the first of my story, the guy who was operating the telescope on the top of this physics building back in the 1970s, Lowell Lyon? We've remained friends, and he calls me once in a while. He says, Mark, how'd you like to go out and take our dogs out and do some observing? He says, we're going up to Wolf Creek. I says, well, I'm kind of into astrophotography right now. Do you mind if I just bring my scope and do some? No, that's fine. So they all brought their big Dobsonians, and I've got my little LX90 here to take some astrophotography. And when they finally all went to bed and the laser pointers weren't going all over the sky, and you know, that's what you do when you're observing, so there's nothing bad about that. But when they all went to bed, I started doing astrophotography, and here's one of the pictures I took.
Oh,
That's beautiful.
That is a single exposure, 3 minutes at ISO 1600, 18 millimeters. It's a standard kit lens on my Canon camera. And I showed this to a couple of people. They said, man, that's really good. And then I entered it in a fair and won a blue ribbon. And then Patrick Wiggins of the Astronomical Society asked me if he could use it on the cover of our newsletter. And I was honored. This is probably the neatest thing that ever happened to Pleasant Valley Observatory in 2019. That young man named Zach up there, he approached me. And he says, Mark, I see this observatory in your backyard. He says, is that an observatory? I says, yeah. He says, my girlfriend is studying physics at the university and wants to be an astronomer. And she loves the night sky. I got this idea. Would you mind if I proposed to my girlfriend in your observatory? And I thought, how cool is that? So we made a little plan. And I said, I'm going to show you my most beautiful star in the sky, which was Alberio. And that will be your cue. So I lined up Alberio, and we're looking, and I said, this is the most beautiful star in the sky, and then I just went silent. And I'm down, I got off the platform, and there were two young people up there, and he turns and he says, Cassandra, he says, you're my most beautiful star. Would you marry me?
Oh, wow.
My wife and I got to share that wonderful, special moment with those young people.
what did she say?
She said yes. Hey, how could she say no to that?
I mean, there's still possible.
Okay, how many of you saw Comet Neowise when it came in 2020? I decided to go up to the elementary school up the street, just set up my photo tripod, nothing special here. Just took these with my kit lens again. But it was fun being able to get some pictures of Comet Neowise. Now, I told you that most of my life I've done visual astronomy. I'm just getting back into astrophotography. So in 2021, I started just experimenting and started taking some pictures. These are not world class or anything. I'm just, starting to get back into it again and learning how to guide and all that kind of stuff. Most people are trying to capture hours and hours and hours of data, red, green, blue, luminescence. Well, I decided I'm going to try something different. How short of exposures can I take and actually get a noticeable object? So here is the first night I started my work, and I've been working on it since, but these are all 30-second exposures through an 80-millimeter refractor. The Perseus double cluster, M16, the Eagle Nebula, M81 and M82, M27, the Dumbbell Nebula, M57, the Ring Nebula, the Great Galaxy and Andromeda, Alberio, the Hercules M13, and M11, the Wild Duck Cluster.
Wow.
And so 30-second exposures with modern technology. Astrophotography is becoming very accessible for all of us. And does it look like the Hubble Space Telescope behind you? No, but that's okay. That's the Hubble Space Telescope, right? Everybody who knows me knows I love to do star parties, or star BQs, I call them, in my backyard. And I have groups over to my observatory all summer. And here's me getting ready for a star party. I'm collimating my big dog with my laser collimator right now there on the right. And I've had a blast showing people the night sky over the years at my observatory. Here's a group I did. And I hooked up my, my cell phone, and the one that's actually videoing this presentation right now. I hooked it up to my Schmidt-Cassegrain, and I took video clips. Let every single person who was there take a video clip of Saturn or Jupiter to take as a reminder of their visit to my observatory. And all these is random screenshots of the video clip. These are not Photoshopped. That is just raw. And so you can see what you can see just through backyard astronomy equipment. That's pretty awesome, what you can get. Okay, I've started making some videos for my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel has all my interests on it, but one of those is astronomy. This has the most views of any of my videos. I modified a Skywatcher HEQ5 Pro with the roll and belt modification, showed people how to upgrade their mount so it was comparable in operation to the newer mount that Skywatcher made. I just made this one in October. I wanted to show people that you don't need to spend thousands of dollars to do astrophotography. So I set up my 35-year-old photo tripod, put a ball head on it, and put my Canon T5i Rebel on here with the kit lens at 55 millimeters. Hooked an intervalometer to it on my back patio in Bountiful, Utah. I think it's like Bortle 5 or 6. It's horrible light pollution, right? And I took that picture of the North American nebula.
Wow.
I post-processed it in Deep Sky Stacker, free, and I post-processed it in GIMP, free. So don't tell me you don't have enough money to do astrophotography. If you really want to do it, you can probably do it with the stuff you have in your closet right now. Don't wait till someday when you can get this before you enjoy life. Start enjoying your life right now, because the power is with you. Okay, 2 frequent questions. Do you ever become afraid of the dark? I have people ask me this all the time, because I literally spend all night in the dark. All night. My family knows, they've heard me say this a lot. When I go in my observatory and I close the door and I open the shutter, I almost get giddy. It's like getting back with my old friend. And in the early morning hours while the city sleeps, I luxuriate in the quiet darkness. Then it's just me and my friend, the cosmos. And I spent some of the most enjoyable hours of my life. Just me and my friend. Rachel made me this to hang in my observatory.
Oh, that's nice.
I have loved the stars too fondly to be fearful of the night. Have you ever seen anything strange in the sky while you were stargazing? Yeah, actually I have on a number of occasions. Probably the most fantastic one we saw was up at Soapstone in the Uinta Mountains. I was doing a star party for a great big group of people, and I had just got through showing them Saturn, and I was slowing my telescope to M13, the Great Globular Star Cluster in Hercules. And people were starting to say, what's that? What's that? And I'm not paying any attention because I'm working on my telescope. Finally, one grabbed me and says, Mark, what's that? And as I'm getting ready to look at that, he says, well, what's that? There's another one. Well, as it turns out, there are 5 objects in the sky, equidistant, around a common point, and they are all converging on that common point at the exact same velocity. And so I finally said, let's watch. And they all came together exactly at the same time, and then,
Amazing. Wow.
and we all just sat there and off for about 5 seconds, and then one of the people says, Mark, what was that?
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's why there's a term, unidentified flying, I think they call them unidentified aerial phenomena now or something, but it was something unexplainable. And it was definitely something there. I mean, they looked like satellites. It was very, very interesting. So, yeah, that's one. You guys know that I collect lots and lots of stuff. Here's some more of my collections.
Oh, no.
Let's talk about collections and astronomy. You know what the wonderful thing about astronomy and collecting is? Nobody on Earth can ever go take one of the things out of the night sky and lock it away in their private collection. Everything in the night sky belongs to all of us. Nobody can ever take it away. Yeah, I like that about astronomy.
How long did it take you to collect all those things?
A lifetime. So you have a whole lifetime ahead of you. You can think of all the wonderful things you want to do with your life, right? Lessons learned. Here's your chance to listen to a 66-year-old guy tell you about some of the things he's learned in his life. Maybe some of these things will resonate with you. You don't need to spend a lot of money to enjoy the night sky. You can sit out on a blanket. You can simply look up and appreciate the vastness of the cosmos. If you want to buy a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars for $30, you can probably see most of the Messier objects with a pair of binoculars. You can get yourself a planisphere and learn the night sky. They got a lot of apps for your phone now that are completely free that you can learn the night sky. And so you don't need to spend a lot of money to start enjoying the night sky. You do not have to have the latest technology. My observatory, both of my telescopes are 20 years old. And my computer system is a Windows 7 laptop. And it works perfectly. You don't have to have no, don't raise your hands. How many of you have ever got the latest, greatest technology and you hadn't even learned to use its capabilities fully before you were deciding that you needed to buy the next model up? It's a trap. It's a trap. Bigger isn't necessarily better. The best telescope is the one you'll use. I cannot stress this enough. People get aperture fever and they buy these great big Schmidt-Cassegrains or Dobsonians and they can't even get them around. And so buy something that you can get. I have a friend. I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, but he got a really good deal on an old Meade 10-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain. He couldn't even hardly lift it up on the field tripod. So what good is that? If you can't use it, you're not going to use it, right? Join your local club. We're all here at the Utah Astronomy Club. These people all share your passion for the night sky. Associate with people who love what you love. It multiplies your pleasure. In fact, let's get mathematical. It's probably exponential. It's probably not linear, right? Have patience with yourself. Enjoy your journey. Don't think you have to know everything right now. That's unrealistic. Spend your life learning the things you want to learn and take the time necessary to learn them. The joy is in the journey. It's not just the destination. It's not getting there. It's going about getting there where the joy is. Enjoy the hobby on your terms. How many of you in here like visual astronomy best? How many of you like astrophotography best? Who's right?
Me.
You're all right. You enjoy it on your terms. You define what the hobby is going to mean to you. What breadth do you pursue? What depth do you pursue? That's completely up to you, each individual. about 5 years ago, I was riding my motorcycle around town, and I drove up the street where Scott Crosby and his dad had built their observatory. Scott was out in the driveway working on his side-by-side. And I thought, oh, I'm going to stop and say hi to Scott. And I was in a hurry, and I thought, he's probably busy. So I just kept going up the street. And I had this compelling feeling inside. You need to go back and talk with Scott. And I tried to ignore it, and the further I drove, the stronger it got. I was compelled to turn my motorcycle around. I went back. Scott was so happy to see me, a big ear-to-ear grin. We got talking about old times. We ended up out in the observatory laughing. I had one of the most beautiful mornings I've ever spent with a friend. 3 months later, I heard he passed. In AD 79, August 24th, the fair citizens of Pompeii had just sat down to their daily meal, which by tradition at that time was the noon meal. And at that time, Mount Vesuvius violently erupted and rained pumice and ash down on this little town. So fast and furious was this torrent that it eventually covered the city in 7 meters of ash and pumice. And then the volcano unleashed a pyroclastic flow of superheated poisonous gas, killed thousands of people. Now, how many of those people in Pompeii do you think awoke on August 24th, AD 79, thinking, well, today's my last day on planet Earth? How many of you think we're thinking that?
0.
That's right. But it was their last day, wasn't it? See, you and I go around thinking we have a lease on life, and we got years and years and years, and maybe we do, and maybe we don't. None of us really knows how much time we have. When they unearthed Pompeii in modern times, irony of ironies, they found this engraved in the wall of a public building in Pompeii. Enjoy life while you have it, for tomorrow is uncertain. Folks, don't put off till tomorrow to do the things your heart wants to do. Start finding ways to work those into your routine. If you can't afford a $1,000 telescope, maybe you can afford a pair of binoculars. If you want to do astronomy, you'll find a way to put it in your life. You know, one of the interesting things about our hobby, my friends, is that it's a little bit frustrating. How many times have you decided that you were going to spend a night out under the stars and then the weather didn't cooperate?
Oh, yeah.
The last 3 months.
It gets very frustrating, doesn't it? Yeah, here's Paul. He runs the remote observatory down on Frisco Peak. And I mean, you get all ready to do science, and all of a sudden the sky's all dark, and you can't do a darn thing, right? But yet we keep doing it. And how many of you guys have ever gone to bed and you're going out to close the blinds, and it's a perfectly clear sky, and you think, oh my gosh, I probably should get my telescope out. Well, you probably should. Maybe just an hour or so. Why couldn't you do that? My wife and I are always talking, we get very philosophical about life. And we were talking one day and we thought, think back on all the wonderful experiences we've had in our life where we wouldn't have had them if we had been averse to hassle. Loading up all the camping gear, going out, setting it up, loading our motorcycles, tuning the motorcycles, cleaning the motorcycles, taking my telescopes, polar aligning my telescopes. And I'm thinking, they were all hassle, a lot. But look what we would have missed out on in life if we had been willing to deal with hassle. Don't let hassle keep you from living your life. Last July, I told my wife, I haven't been out this year to a dark sky site to really do astrophotography. Darn it. The weather hasn't cooperated, my schedule hasn't cooperated, we're going to Wolf Creek. So the weather didn't look good, it's cloudy. I said, by golly, I'm still going to Wolf Creek. So we loaded everything up. And my wife and I got up there, and the sky was cloudy, so we set up our camp, and we decided to make lemonade out of lemons. So we did some hiking, took some photographs, sat and read our book together, enjoyed just being together, and then went to bed. About 1 o'clock I wake, and I think, I wonder what the sky looks like. And I thought, oh, it's kind of cozy here in my bed. And I thought really hard about just rolling back over and going to sleep. And then my little good voice inside says, Mark, why did you come up here? You came up here to take a picture of the night sky, didn't you? I think that's why we came here. So I peel out of my sleeping bag and I go outside and the sky's still dark. I mean cloudy. So I decided to just sit in my camping chair, and I sat there for an hour and just listened to the profound quiet of the night. And then all of a sudden, in the area of Cygnus, the sky started opening. And I quickly grabbed my photo tripod and my little T5I Rebel, and I went running down the road trying to find a place between the trees. And I took a number of photographs. And the picture you see under here of the North American Nebula and the North Milky Way is the picture I took that night. Now, not the best picture I ever took, but if I had stayed in my sleeping bag, I would have no picture. Carpe diem, seize the day.
Or the night.
Or the night. Look at the beautiful sunrise that greet us the next day.
Oh, yes, I was hoping you did with that.
I started my presentation with a thought by Vincent van Gogh, the way to know life is to love many things. I'd like to end by showing you his masterwork, The Starry Night. I love this painting because I think it portrays the night sky as it really is, dynamic, in motion, and profoundly beautiful. It's been a privilege to talk with you tonight about my love of the starry sky. Clear skies, everyone.
Thank you.